Hello and welcome to yet another video, and in this video it is something different because I would like to talk about this camera right here. It's the Panasonic Lumix GH3. I know this camera to many people, including me, is an ancient camera. It has been out for a while. There are a lot of better cameras out there by now, but being a channel that I usually talk a lot about old cameras that are still good and you can really get it for a really good price nowadays, I feel the urge to also make a video about this camera because I got this camera for around 125 euros plus the battery grip, 3 batteries and a few more accessories. Obviously the lens didn't come with it, but this pancake lens, I got it together with a GX1 for just 170 euros. So if you divide that by half, this is really a good deal just to get, you know, a really decent lens onto a Panasonic system. Or being a micro four thirds system, you can really adapt a lot of lenses onto this system, get other cheap lenses adapted to this camera. Not to mention that there are actually a lot of cheap lenses for this particular system that already exist out there anyway, whether it's in the secondhand area or the brand new section from maybe Sigma and other brands. So without further ado, let's get into the video. So the GH3, this camera has been out for a while now in my opinion. Of course, for some people it's still not that old of a camera, but to me it's actually quite old. And in this video I would like to talk about the actual operational side of things, the image quality, the video quality, what I think about it, and just pretty much into my conclusion. So first, the ergonomics and the operational side of things. This camera is very grippy. One of the reasons why I didn't really get into the GH line of cameras, even though we eventually got into the GH4 and so on when I had the Panasonic lineup and I sold everything. But anyway, it's really big and beefy, and I was working with the 5D Mark III, the Nikon DSLRs, and I also had the Fuji system and still have the Fuji system. I have the GH3 recording me right now, and with the so much bigger sensor cameras that I had at the time and still have, I never really got the reason that justify why should I upgrade or downgrade to a, depending on where you how you look at it, it could be an upgrade or downgrade onto a smaller sensor that essentially had a really big size to it. Of course, if you're using Panasonic Micro Four Thirds system natively, then having a bigger size is an advantage because you're finally able to fit in a bigger, better battery in there. You're finally able to grip the camera nicely, have that weight to really balance the camera out, and just so many other positives that outweighs the negative. But if you're coming from a bigger sensor camera like me at the time and owning a Panasonic, it's just you look at it and I wish the camera was so much smaller, because even Canon mirrorless cropped cameras and also the Sony cropped cameras were smaller than the GH line of cameras. And if you look at the Sony a6000 line of cameras, that could actually, how you look at it, can do more than the GH3. And yet they were so much smaller than the GH3 that offers more features. You kind of question why should I really hold on to the GH line cameras? But the size, the form factor doesn't always really matter, and that was my thought at the time anyway. But since nowadays these cameras are going for really affordable, really cheap price tag, I thought the technology hasn't really downgraded from this camera. Just newer technologies has been announced since then. Doesn't mean that this camera is really bad in any way. So why not just pick one up and actually do a video about it, since technically it is still quite a good, decent camera, especially for the price point. So what you're getting in terms of the ergonomics of this camera and also the operational side of this camera, well, it's very Panasonic. If you're working with any other Panasonic cameras, you'll be able to go through the menu system, work with this camera, just your eyes closed, or just need maybe a few minutes of adjusting and then everything is there. This camera though is plagued with the usual Panasonic build quality, which is over time some of the dials is not as sensitive. In my case, this dial is not sensitive unless if you press it and really just press it and move it, and otherwise you won't hear anything and it's just like sliding around, not adjusting anything. You really have to press it and move it on this one. I know that there are worse scenarios with these cameras. It's really plagued with the GH2, GH3, GH4 and GH5 that this touchscreen is not as sensitive over time and can have a mind of its own, and also both dials can go like really nuts over time. But fortunately only for me that this dial is not really functioning that well. It's still functioning, just not as sensitive, and it's just a really common problem that I hope Panasonic has already fixed with their full frame full frame mirrorless that they announced, because man, this problem is really bad. But obviously not everyone will have this problem, and maybe it's partly why I got this camera for, you know, 125 euros versus for like 150 euros that it's usually going for. So yeah, there's that. Otherwise, the operational side of things, it's also really nice. The ISO button, I really like having a separate ISO button and separate white balance button as well as the exposure compensation button. But being Panasonic, you are able to set different function buttons to do things that you want it to do. So another thing is, if you're playing with other Lumix cameras, it might be different from yours despite being the same model, and that's kind of like a nice thing about it, is because, you know, you can always personalize your camera to do whatever you want. Other photographers will do the same, or filmmakers. So yeah, there's that. The menu system is better than Sony, and this is a really subjective thing. I think it can be more organized, but for what it is, it's still enough organized. And for the camera that doesn't have a lot of features, it also means that you will not really get lost in the menu system anyway. So yeah, there's that. The handling of this camera, the feel of it is really nice, great. It fits in your hand. Everything is really nicely built. It's weather sealed as well, and this is actually with a battery grip. The 125 euros, as I mentioned earlier, comes with 3 batteries and also a battery grip. So yeah, it's really affordable. Then you have a fully articulated screen right here, which is kind of loose, but not too loose. Like if you're coming from the Canon and Nikon system, then you'll find it loose, but if you're from a Panasonic system, then it's really typical Panasonic's screen rotation feel kind of thing. It has a microphone and headphone jack port, which is nice because, well, you can monitor your sound and you can add in external audio to it. And also, talking about audio, the preamp on this camera is actually much more improved than the than the GH2, and that's pretty nice because it's actually like nicer than the 5D Mark II and 5D Mark III, the preamp of this camera that is. So you can get away with recording the internal audio from an external mic or something, or even using an internal mic but still getting a cleaner audio because of a better preamp on this particular camera. So yeah, there's that. The viewfinder is also great. I wish that this sensor here is a little bit less sensitive though, but that's just my taste. I just wish that it's less sensitive. It would be a lot more useful, especially on a gimbal or something like that, or if you're really shooting and you're back to the wall and yeah, and you cannot really turn off the sensor or don't have time for it, then I just wish that it would be less sensitive. But otherwise, the viewfinder is nice. The refresh rate is decent for the price point, and the color accuracy is not really there yet, but it's not really that bad that you would really complain about. It's decently nice. So yeah, there's that. There's only one SD card slot, but to me that is fine. To a lot of people that is a deal breaker. And there's also a pop-up flash built in, which is nice because a lot of professional cameras from other manufacturers, they just omit the flash for better weather sealing, but this camera still has the flash included. But the downside of the flash is that it's really not that high, and it's pretty close to the lens. So even if you have the red eye reduction turned on, physically, you know, theoretically, you will still be able to get red eye very easily with such a short flash distance. But since I don't use a lot of flash, actually I haven't used the flash on this camera at all anyway, so it doesn't really matter. But if you're into flash photography, especially if you're using the internal flash quite a bit, then that could be a problem if your subject is human. but if you're using a lot of external flash, that could be fine. I also like the fact that whether you're in photography or video mode, you will always have the sound monitor on the screen. So there's that. And I also like the fact that you can always move the histogram anywhere on the screen you want. Well, almost anywhere. Whereas some other cameras, like let's say my Canon and my Fujifilm, is not really flexible where the histogram is. So yeah, there's that. And I really like that about this camera, because I do like having histogram on my screen, but I would also like the freedom to adjust the histogram to wherever I want it, and this camera allows me to do it. So now into the photography, like photo quality, image quality. This camera is, well, it's an old camera. The color science is not as bad in my opinion as the GH4 and the G7, thankfully. But being an older camera, it also gives a really nice feel, a nice old digital vintage feeling, if that makes sense. And it's just refreshing every time I look at the images or just edit the images out of this camera. And to me, I would put it in a really positive side of things. Of course, the negative side of things is the detail in low light is not really there. Even if you do long exposure and try to bring things up, it just loses a lot of detail, and it's really a downside on this particular camera. And it's not really about Micro Four Thirds per se, it's just about Panasonic, how they did, like, of course Sony makes the sensors for Panasonic, that's no secret, but how Panasonic modify the sensors into the camera, I think there's a little bit of like a problem with that, because if Olympus can pull a sensor that is able to have detail that competes with something like a 5D Mark III, for example, then I think the Panasonic should be able to do that. But I don't know, they are able to produce nice videos, but just in terms of photo quality, the detail of it is just not really there. The color depth is not really there, but in terms of the mood and the character, I really like this camera. Then let's say the GH4, the GH5, the GH5S, I also tried the GH9, also had the GH9, but this, in my opinion, gives it more character than even the G9, so there's that. But it's, again, really subjective topic. Overall, I would put it in a positive side of things, unless if you're planning to really work a lot and really push the file a lot, edit a lot with the raw file out of this camera, then of course the file is going to fall really badly apart. So if you're into that, then it's best not to go for this camera. But for simple editing with raw files, this camera can really pull a really nice image out, and it will still give you really nice character and feel to it. So yeah, there's that. Oh, and I forgot to mention one last thing about the operational side of thing is the autofocusing system. It's, in my opinion, more accurate than the GH4 because it's not trying to be fast, it's just trying to be accurate. The GH4, the GH5, in my opinion, it tried to be faster than all the other competitors, that it even focuses on its noise. Like, once you're in low light and you have high ISO turned on, it will confirm that its noise is in focus, but you really want the object to be in focus. So it's really distracting that they were really trying to compete with the speed more than the actual what matters, like the actual area of focus. So this camera would still be more usable and more practical and more accurate in terms of autofocusing system in photography than other Panasonic cameras that I've used, at least. I know that a few months ago Panasonic released a firmware update to their GH5 and GH5S lineup, and it's proven to be more accurate, so maybe they finally got it right by now. But since I've pretty much sold all of my professional Lumix line in favor of keeping my Canon and Fujifilm line, I really have nothing to really prove that to you. But it should be much improved by now, since a lot of people said it's improved. Must be true. So now onto the video side of things, and while we just talked about the autofocusing system for video is not really that good, but that is to be expected. And if you're using this camera for filming, for YouTube especially, I think it's kind of okay if you have it on the latest firmware, and if you're just really being stationary like this and just filming yourself like how I'm filming this video right now, then I think the autofocusing system will be able to get to keep up. but you know, sometimes if you're moving a lot like this, then it might confuse the actual focusing system a little bit, but it will not take that long to bring it back to in focus. And if you're using the lenses with, like, you know, prime lenses that are good at focusing anyway, like the f2.5 ones, the f 1.7 lenses, the 1.4 lenses, things like that, the more good quality lenses, then it will be able to keep up, definitely. But if you're using like a third-party lens or some sort of kit lens, it will not really be able to really always keep track of you for some reason. So yeah, there's that. But onto the actual video quality, it's actually still quite nice. I think if you're doing it professionally, you still can get a lot of work done with this. The dynamic range is, although not the best in the world, but you are still able to deliver a lot of professional results with this particular camera, with the file that's coming out of it. And talking about file, it's actually really small. And for the bitrate that you're getting, for the detail you're getting, and the image quality in video, how much you can push the shadows and highlights, it's still really a bargain, and you still can really use it for budget professional shoots. Like if someone is asking you for like to shoot a wedding or to shoot even commercials but on a budget, or music videos, this camera is great. And for the price being around 125, 150 euros, what have you, give or take, that means you can actually buy multiple of these bodies and just, you know, shoot proper professional work, like proper interview work. The files are even sharp enough, like sometimes to even punch in a little, but just by a little. So yeah, it's really nice working with the files from this camera. But being an old camera, it also means that you are able to find a lot of plugins, a lot of extensions. If you're editing with the footage from this camera, you are able to find like effects, plugins, things like that to improve your footage. There are like a lot out there that I've seen. A lot are free, a lot of them are just under 5 euros, under 5 quid. And yeah, it's really nice and affordable package to really go for. So yeah, with this camera, in terms of video quality, I think it's still quite nice. The moire, the aliasing is still somewhat there, but much better controlled than, let's say, the 5D Mark II or the 650D or other DSLRs in this price point. It's definitely much better than those DSLRs. And it's just overall still a really nice overall hybrid camera to really use, especially for its price point. So I would still recommend this camera if your priority is not having like the best autofocusing system for video, nor the most reliable system for video, like the AF. And if you can cope with the one SD card slot, as well as not being able to film in really low light situation. The GH4 is notoriously bad for low light, but this camera is even worse for low light than the GH4. Keep that in mind. So you might need a lot of really low aperture lenses like f1.4, f1.2, f0.95, but you know, 0.95 would be really expensive. Just to keep the video short, I'm gonna go into the conclusion now. I know it's not a super detailed video, but there's so many reviews and super detailed videos of this camera out there by now. I just want to share my thoughts about this camera and why I recommend it still. In conclusion, I would still recommend this camera if you're starting out, whether in photography, filmmaking, or a bit of both, and see where you can take things to. But you also must be kind of sure that you're going with a Micro Four Thirds system, or maybe this camera could be a stepping stone for the Micro Four Thirds system for you if you're into it, and see where it takes you, because it is really affordable. And if it gets lost, or if it gets broken, or if you, at the end of the day you decide that this system is not for you, it's still not that much of an investment, and you still can pretty much sell it at almost the price of what you bought it from. So yeah, overall I would still recommend it. It's really worth it. The color, in my opinion, has more character to it than the more modern Panasonic Micro Four Thirds system cameras. The battery life is really nice on this camera still, and mine came with 3 batteries and a battery grip anyway, so it's really nice. And you still can find similar options available depending on where you live and depending on the time of the year you buy the camera from, because sometimes, you know, it's cheaper to buy it at the end of the year and more expensive to buy it at the beginning of the year, simply because of, you know, demand and supply. The end of the year, people are getting rid of their old cameras, buying a new camera, things like that. So there are oversupply of these older cameras and makes it cheaper. So yeah, there is that. And not to mention that this camera is actually really tough and it's weather sealed. I shot this camera in rain before, in snowstorm in the Netherlands before, and it pretty much survived. And you know, for the price, if you don't want to care too much about the camera that you have with you and just care about the shot, this camera being a tough camera and also a camera that doesn't depend a lot on having a lot of features, it really helps you to really focus on your getting your shots. So yeah, there's that. And if you're filming video or taking pictures in bright sunlight, there's another point of contact. By just looking to the viewfinder here, you're just getting you're seeing what you're gonna get essentially. So yeah, there's that. If you're okay with not having such a robust raw file or image file to really edit, then this camera is also really a camera for you. So yeah, there's that. I hope this video helps somewhat. Thank you very much for watching. If you need a free photography guidebook, it's absolutely for free on my website. The link is down in the description below. It's absolutely for free. You don't need to send me your email address, and I will not bombard you with my newsletter or what have you. So yeah, thank you very much for watching. Have fun shooting. Stay safe. Bye.